Hello and welcome to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neal Howard. Thank you so much for joining us for another segment. In this segment, we're going to be speaking with healthcare veteran Nancy Lurker, President and CEO of EyePoint Pharmaceuticals. She's joining us on the program to discuss how she transformed EyePoint in just 5 years with a robust pipeline of developing and commercializing innovative therapies to help improve the lives of patients who are living with serious eye disorders. Welcome to Health Professional Radio, Nancy Lurker. Thank you.
Thank you. My pleasure to be here.
Well, as President and CEO of EyePoint Pharmaceuticals, give us a brief look into your professional background, and then let's talk about how you transformed this company using this robust pipeline of products.
Yeah, I've been in the pharmaceutical industry for over 30 years and started out actually as a pharmaceutical sales representative many, many years ago. Got my MBA at night and really had a hunger for climbing the ranks, but more importantly, having more sway over how drugs were marketed, commercialized, and eventually developed. So I've always been very ambitious. So I spent 14 years at Bristol Myers Squibb, wonderful company learned a tremendous amount there and had some fantastic mentors. And then went over to Pharmacia, which at that time was considered kind of the dog of the industry and not highly regarded, but I saw some brilliant leadership there when I went in for my interview with Fred Hassan and said, you know what, this is the kind of place I want to be at. Bristol at that time, unfortunately, it had a management change at the top, and you could see again, and you'll hear this from me, culture matters so much, that the company was starting to lose its way. So then when I went to Pharmacia, I was there for 5 years, ran a number of the large global businesses. Then we got bought out by Pfizer. At that point, I really wanted to go run my own company. So I took my first CEO job for a small, private, venture-backed syndicated market research company, and spent 3 years there, got that company turned around back to a profitable footing, ultimately sold it off to IMS. And then I got recruited by Novartis to come and work as their chief marketing officer. So I was thrilled for that opportunity. I actually had the privilege of working with Alex Gorsky, who brought me in, who is, and up until just recently was the chairman and CEO of J&J. Again, wonderful mentor to me. And then I went off, and after that, went back into running my own company, went to a contract sales organization, did that for 7 years, ultimately got that sold, and then was recruited to come into EyePoint Pharmaceuticals 5 years ago.
I understand that you're passionate and very heavily involved in STEM opportunities. Could you explain to our listeners what STEM is and how you're involved with it?
Sure. So STEM really is science and technology. And clearly, if you're in the pharmaceutical industry, you're deep into STEM. I got my undergraduate degree in biology and another degree in chemistry, and then my master's in business. So I've spent my whole career involved in STEM. I would say a couple of things. One thing, I think in general, and I'm making broad statements, it's by no means ubiquitous, but I think in general, and I would say women and people of color, minorities, tend to generally not as much gravitate into STEM. I think there's a whole host of reasons for that: cultural, how we're raised, opportunities, etc., lack of encouragement at times. And I think that that's probably at the basic level what we need to really try to change. There's always a place. And one thing I like to always say is you don't have to be the smartest person in the classroom to have a successful career in STEM. And I think it scares people because there are some really, really smart people who show up, when you're in school in these classes, and it can be intimidating. And I try to encourage people, you don't have to be the one that's getting all the A's, even all the B's. B's and C's are perfectly acceptable in STEM, and it's an incredibly rich ecosystem of opportunities. And I think people think, well, if I go into STEM, I've got to be a scientist or I've got to be a robotics person. And I keep saying, au contraire, you don't have to. There's wonderful careers in STEM that it helps to have that background, but you're not spending your days doing research at the lab, as an example. My career is a classic case. I came up through the commercial ranks. It helped me knowing STEM, but I certainly did not need to have, I wasn't the smartest person in the room, and I certainly haven't spent my whole career, writing research papers.
So I'm sure that it's vastly different, the smaller pharma companies as opposed to the large companies that everyone knows about. You've been involved with both. Talk about some of the little nuances and challenges that you had to overcome.
Well, there's a lot of differences. And again, somewhat is knowing yourself and what you're suited for. And again, as you go through life, it's a self-discovery process where, big pharma, first of all, you learn the incredible best practices that you learn there are just phenomenal. It does tend to be, because they have to be, they're so complex, more process-driven. So what does that mean? You're going to spend more time in meetings. You're going to spend more time getting approvals for things by nature, and there's a lot of body of work around this. They tend to be more political as the companies get larger. There's lots of reasons why, but it just that is the case. So if you don't mind managing the politics, you like process, tend to be more risk averse, then big pharma is the place for you. You do get more resources. You get more staff. You have more career opportunities. So there's a lot of pluses. As I said, on the downside, it does tend to be more bureaucratic and more political. You got to manage the political landscape more. In small pharma, the risk is greater. Again, particularly in the space that we're in, biotech, lots of companies never make it. In fact, the majority of them never make it. Now, you can easily, if you've done well, you can hop to another company, but it can be disconcerting when you're laid off or the company doesn't make it. So if you can tolerate a little more risk, you get to be able to have much more input into decision making, not as bureaucratic, not as process driven. You're much more hands-on. I mean, we've got some wonderful people in our company that are Generation Z and millennials, and they love working at EyePoint because they get exposure to the top management. They get to have a broad range of exposure to different skill sets because you're not pigeonholed as much. But you have to have a certain risk tolerance. There's never a guarantee that a company's going to make it when you're small in this highly risky space.
Whether large or small, how important is it to become an expert on the manufacturing side of biopharma as opposed to, the meetings, the constant approvals? What are some of the challenges faced trying to get this step right?
Yeah. So I would actually say, other than what I would call large antibodies, which require biosynthesis and large plants where your, bacteria typically are producing these drugs, that's complex. Small molecules are not as complex on the manufacturing side. What's most important is really understanding research, how you discover, how to pick the winners, and then the clinical trial design. That's actually more critical than the manufacturing. Not to say manufacturing is not important, it absolutely is. But you can manufacture a drug, doesn't mean you're going to get it, through the regulatory process and that it will work safely in humans. So it's really understanding where and how do you parse through all the opportunities? Where do you put your bets? Because, again, I'm just going to remind your audience, I'll give you an example. Just to bring one of our drugs that we're in phase 1 with for a number of serious eye diseases, we're probably going to spend there's 3 phases, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and then you file for regulatory approval with the FDA. Between all 3 of those studies, we're probably going to spend $250 to $500 million bringing that drug to market. That's how much it costs just to go through all the regulatory studies. You better know what you're doing, because if you screw up, you're wasting a huge amount of money, not to mention the most important thing, which is bringing eyesight saving drugs to patients. So you really have to understand it well.
Nancy, if you would, give us a website where we can learn more about EyePoint Pharma and the technologies that you're developing there.
Yeah. Go to www.eyepoint, pharma.com.
Great.
And that is our website where we list we have about one drug we're going into 4 different eye diseases, and then we have another drug in a small phase 3 study and 2 drugs on the market today. So we're pretty excited about where we are as a company. We've got a very exciting future ahead of us. And most importantly, we've got some wonderful products that hopefully we'll be able to bring to patients, which are helping save their vision, which is such a wonderful mission to have.
Nancy, it's been a pleasure speaking with you this morning. I appreciate you taking the time and joining us here on Health Professional Radio.
Thank you, Howard. Thank you very much.
You've been listening to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neal Howard, in conversation with Nancy Lurker, President and CEO of EyePoint Pharmaceuticals. Audio copies of this program are available at hpr.fm and healthprofessionalradio.com.au. You can also subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, listen in, download it, SoundCloud, and be sure and subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/healthprofessionalradio.